But what I especially want you to notice is not just the blue arrows. I want you to notice the green arrows. The green arrows are Muslim civilians. Muslim civilians who were pushed out by armies, by soldiers, just as surely as Armenian civilians were pushed out. And you'll notice that more than 900,000 Muslim civilians were forced out of their homes and forced to other places. And like the Armenians, they suffered from disease and starvation. They suffered in the same way. To say that this is an Armenian problem or a Turkish problem or a Kurdish problem is looking at this completely wrongly. This is a human problem in which all sides suffered terribly. Oddly enough, though, the ones who suffered the most were the Armenians who went up to Russia. Because they fled from Van and from eastern Erzurum province. When the Ottomans came through, they fled up to what today is Armenia. They fled up to that region. And when they got there, the Russians basically did nothing for them. The Russians then went back and took the land back. They took back Van, they took back eastern Erzurum province, they made it Russian land. And the Armenians said, wonderful, now we can go home. And the Russians said, no, you will stay up in South Caucasus and you will starve. And they did. They starved so badly that there was cannibalism. They ate each other. Why? Because the Russians didn't want the Armenians to take the land. They wanted it for themselves. So they said to the Armenians, you stay here. And half the Armenians, these are Armenian figures, not mine, and British and Russian figures, half the Armenians who went up there were dead by the end of the war. So of all those who suffered, if you were going to be an Armenian, you'd be better off down here, better off than you would be up there. But I must also say that this relocation shows you something. It shows you something about what actually happened to the people of the area. I want to stress to you that many of the stories you hear about what happened to the Armenians, the ones that were massacred, the ones who were robbed, many of these stories are absolutely true. In war, evil men do evil things. And there were bad men who were Turks, just like there were bad men who were Armenians and Russians. And there were places where there were massacres of Armenians, especially in Harput and in Trabzon. We know this took place. I have actually talked to people who were in these massacres. We know these took place. We know that there were massacres, of course, lots of massacres of Muslims by Armenians, but we can't forget that Turks connect badly too. But there's a tremendous difference between what the Turks did and what the Armenians and the Russians did. And that difference is this. You mentioned the commission that looked into this. They actually did meet and act. What you see in front of you here are the convicted Turks, convicted of crimes against Armenians. They were brought in, they were tried in either court-martials or regular courts, they were convicted, and all of these were imprisoned or they were hung. The Turkish government said, if you stole from Armenians, if you killed Armenians and we catch you, we will hang you. And they did, including one governor of a province. Yeah? I suggest to you that this pretty much proves that no one intended genocide. If you intend genocide, you don't hang the people who do what you want. The Turkish government intended the Armenians to be protected. Were they successful? No, they failed many times. But at least they tried, and they punished the people that did evil things. Now let me ask you, of all the Armenians who killed Turks and Kurds, of all the Russians who committed massacres and atrocities, how many of them were ever killed? How many of them were ever tried? How many of them were ever hung? None. Not one. Who is responsible for genocide, I ask you? Once again, if we look at the figures, one of the things you notice is that the Armenians of Istanbul, of Edirne, of Izmir, they all survived the war. The only Armenians in these areas who are actually killed are Armenian politicians, rebel politicians who are hung. This does take place. But all the regular Armenians are allowed to live out the war. They keep their jobs, they act normally. Why? Because they're not a threat. And because they're not a threat, the Ottomans do nothing to them at all. Now I suggest to you, this once again demonstrates that we're not talking about genocide here. At least not what we understand by genocide. As my colleague knows, there are many definitions of genocide. Some of them would say that all sides were guilty of genocide at this time. But what I want to say is basically what I would say to my students. As we summarize for a class, I would say there are many reasons why you do not have a genocide. There are many reasons why the Ottomans moved the Armenians. The evidence includes the fact that the Armenians helped the Russians to fight against the Ottomans. Armenian rebels openly declared that they would destroy the Ottoman Empire. There are neutral statements of British and others that say that that's exactly what the Armenians planned to do. We know that at the war's beginning, Armenian young men joined the Russians and refused to fight for their own country. We know that they cut telegraph lines, we know that they cut roads, we know that they seized whole Ottoman cities. We know that they slaughtered Muslims or forced the Muslims to run away, to retreat, and ultimately to die of starvation and disease. The Ottomans must have known that if the Armenians remained in Anatolia, that the Armenians would have caused more rebellion and would have damaged the Ottoman war effort even more. It seems to me that the Armenians acted as conscious agents of the Russians. That the Dashnaks, well, for instance, we know that the Dashnak party collected today's equivalent of $15 million from the Russians in order to fight against the Turks. We know this from Dashnaks themselves, from evidence of the Armenians. We know that the Armenians joined the Ottomans and joined the Russians in tens of thousands. We can see that the actions of the rebels, of the Armenians, were too specific. Obviously, they were intended to hurt the Ottoman army, and it's impossible to believe that this wasn't planned. But the important thing is that it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference if the Russians gave the orders to the Armenians or if the Armenians did it on their own. It makes no difference at all. What counted was, because of the Armenians, the Russians were winning the war. What counted was the damage that they were doing to the Ottomans. And it was because of that that the Ottomans decided to relocate, to move the Armenians. I would contend that the Ottomans never intended a genocide, that they did not commit a genocide. But what they did was try to defend their people. Thank you.